Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rural Networks and Private Networks panel. I'd like to start this panel by making what may be a controversial statement, and I'll invite my panelists to disagree with me. Controversy is a good thing. I asked a question yesterday when there was the panel on partnerships for growth. Question was, is there a conflict between what a regulator wants and what an operator wants? And the answer was a resounding no. It should be the same thing. We should be all on the same page, all trying to achieve the same objectives. And I disagree with that. Why do I disagree with that? Well, if you were, in the old days, a national operator owned by government, your main shareholder was government. Your main objectives were the same objectives as government. So the regulator and the operator in that case, they had the same objectives. When you bring in a private operator, and when that operator has shareholders that have commercial interests, that operator's objectives are to provide their shareholders with shareholder value. That's not the same thing as connecting rural communities, for instance, because connecting rural communities is not as profitable as delivering services over your core networks. Operators' main revenue comes through their core networks. The revenues from rural networks are less. The development of private networks are specialized. They may be faster, they may be more secure, they may be more remote, even in the case of like oil and gas companies, mining companies, they're off the beaten track. And it's not necessarily the most commercial approach to deliver services to those. There are efforts made by the regulatory authorities, by universal service funds, and by specialized businesses that provide specialized networks for rural connections. And there's still a challenge about that. If it was fixed, then they would be ubiquitous and we wouldn't have the digital divide. So there's still a gap. For private networks, we're now seeing 5G coming into Africa is largely going to be driven by private network companies in remote areas wanting high-speed connectivity. Is an operator, an MNO, going to invest in getting from their core network to there? Possibly not. So the panelists that we have with us here today come from diverse backgrounds, I'm very pleased to say. So we have Jawad Chandoo from Nokia, the account manager. We have Gemayel from Meconnect. We have Chidi from WTES Project Limited in Nigeria. Bradley Shaw from Lynk Global, VP. All of our panelists here have some specific use cases. I've asked them in a fairly unusual way for a panel. I actually want them to tell us success stories. I want not as a sales pitch, but as an insight into what works and what doesn't work. So that as an audience, if you're interested in building rural networks or private networks, I want you to understand a little bit more about how that works or what the challenges are around it as well. So if I can start, maybe Jean, if I can start at your end, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do at Meconnect, and then we'll come back to you to talk about specific use cases after that, if that's okay.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Gemayel. We are having a company that provides solutions, telecom solutions and hardware. We are located in Dubai. We've been in Dubai for 35 years, just serving this market. We do have the three segments of telecommunication, the VSAT, the microwave or the wireless, and the FTTH, the GPON. Our task is we have the things is always ready stock. And some people, especially in the vertical market, they call us the ambulance because whatever they need, they come to us. And we are here. We like to serve Africa. I've been coming to Africa now for about 10 years, and we have partners in Africa. And it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jean. Chidi.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Chidi Ajuzie. I work for a company called WTES Projects. We build and manage metro fiber and long-distance fiber networks across Nigeria. Our flagship network infrastructure is all over Lagos in Nigeria. And then we also have long-distance networks on the national fiber infrastructure, on the national railway infrastructure connecting across the length and breadth of Nigeria. That's true.
Thanks, Chidi. Bradley.
Hi, thanks, Adrian. Hi, guys. My name is Bradley Shaw. I'm the Vice President of Middle East and Africa from Lynk. If you were here yesterday, you would have heard me speak yesterday afternoon. Lynk Global is a LEO satellite operator working in the direct-to-device space. We connect your unmodified mobile phone in your pocket from an old Nokia 3210 all the way through to your latest Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultras, iPhone 15s. As long as the device is 3GPP compliant, works on operator spectrum, it will connect to our satellite flying overhead at 500 kilometers above our heads. It's an exciting space. It's a solution that effectively solves and closes the digital divide entirely with one solution. So we're quite excited about the opportunity that brings for rural communities in Africa.
Thanks, Bradley. And Jawad, we know Nokia, please give a little insight into.
So it's a common question, and Jawad Chandoo is my name. I hail originally from Tanzania, and that's another question I get all the time. You don't look Tanzanian, but I promise you I'm born and bred in Tanzania, and we come from a lineage of originally from the subcontinent of India, but we've settled in Tanzania for 5-6 generations now. Anyways, the second question that I often get, you're from Nokia, is it the phone company? The 3310 as mentioned by Bradley, and that is the good association we have and the good old days with the handsets. Currently, so the part of Nokia we come from, where I work, is we are building, or let me put the official tagline. At Nokia, we create technology that helps the world act together. And it's a very technology-savvy company where we build all the solutions, and our telecom players know us quite well, all the way from 2G and all the way to advances in the 6G research currently, and quite recently into space networks as well, as we have seen in the news a few years ago.
Very interesting. We'll hear a little bit more about that, I think. So, Jean, as I said at the beginning, what I'd like to do, let's assume all of the people in this audience here are itching to roll out a rural network or excited to deploy a private network for their company. What's your advice to them? What works, what doesn't work, and what should they think about in terms of a successful deployment from past experience?
Well, if I look, I've been coming to Africa for 10 years, and what we have been looking for a lot of projects, but nothing really materialized because of there's no, I don't know, I don't call it seriousness, maybe lack of fund, but what we do, we spend a lot of time. Then the customer comes, he says, oh, we don't have the backbone, and the backbone, when we this is my opinion, it is the responsibility of the government. It's not the responsibility of any private investors. They could be joint venture, but the backbone is like a government building a highway, building a road, because it increases the KPI of the country, GDP, the telemedicine industries, textile industries. But a lot of people in this part of the rural areas, they are smart, they are willing to work, but they need the means to get them the information. Honestly, I was watching one time a movie called Harness the Wind. It's an African movie. I was very amazed. The smart guy in the village, out of nothing, he solved a big problem with the drought. But we have a lot of people like this. So I went to Africa, to Nigeria, maybe many times, and we were talking about infra. But really nothing happened. We spoke to USAID, we spoke to Exim Bank, but eventually it was very hard to come with. So I would say the rural, they must be served because they are the limbs of the body. The capital is the heart, but the heart doesn't work by itself. So this is the government. When the government get the point to the villages, then they can create what we call competition among ISP, and innovation is definitely the result of competition. And this way, the people at the villages, they're not asking for really big data. 4 or 5 megabits, they can do YouTube, they can do conference with their relatives, do surfing, do emails. They're not talking about gigs, they're not talking about megabits, 100, 200 megabits. So what they can reach, that's easy. But the will, we have the will. And this is my opinion, it's my private opinion from my experience that I've been doing with many customers in Africa.
That's why you're here, Jean, for your opinion. Chidi, thank you for that, Jean. Chidi, you run, as we discussed previously, fiber networks. And although your core business is those fiber networks, once laid, are access points for rural communities to be able to plug in, right? So can you give us some idea about how a model can work whereby there's collaboration between a backbone network provider like yourselves and companies wanting to develop rural networks? Can you also give us your opinion on whether that should be the MNOs, the big ISPs, or if it should be specialized companies? If it's specialized companies, should they be doing it on behalf of the MNOs? Can you give us some kind of insight into that?
Okay, if you read through the digital agenda of most of the countries in Africa, they try to focus a lot more on connecting the underserved and unconnected, and then expanding access. But we all know that the true value of digital infrastructure is actually from, you derive that from applications and content, and of course you realize that through user adoption. But so what you see is while we're struggling to connect the rural communities just to make simple calls, in the urban centers and the connected environment, we're talking about 5G, we're talking about AI, machine learning. The digital divide is widening. The gaps are widening the more. So one of the things we've tried to do in my environment is that we try to do a disaggregation of the network components for the rural communities. There are 3 major things we've tried to disaggregate to. We looked at the backhaul and transport segment, which is where if you do a business case for rural connectivity and for most operators in the rural environment, you see that 50 to 60% of the cost actually comes from the backhaul components, which is actually where the most of the cost is, because they're trying to find a way to backhaul to the core of the infrastructure. So when we disaggregate that backhaul side of the cost, what we'll be trying to do is to see when I create a long haul network, if you look at the size of Africa, 30 million square kilometers, the rural communities we're talking about, which is more than half of the population, they're residents in these rural communities. They are all dispersed, very wide geographic spread, communities of 1,000 residents, 2,000, 10,000. So you have to find a way to bring those communities together. And you find out that the urban areas that we've already have connected are also dispersed along the same path. So what we see happen is that transport infrastructure are built, transiting through these rural communities to the urban areas. So when you're running this transit to these urban areas, so what we've tried to do is to find a way of dropping in, add and drop in each of these rural communities. I have a network today that transits through, a study we've done, transits through around 2,000 rural communities in Nigeria, the fiber network infrastructure. So what we've tried to do is to find a way to drop service in each of these rural communities and now find small cell operators who can go into those transit communities along the path and provide some level of network and service. Now, in my environment, recently about 43 MVNOs were licensed. Some of these MVNOs are talking to us to take up these services and provide virtually using the RAN infrastructure of the telcos. So what we do is that we offload the huge cost. Essentially, we de-risk the transport and backhaul cost component of it for them, while they focus on just leasing the RAN infrastructure for the telcos. Of course, piggyback on that to reach the BSS and OSS core of the same telcos. I mean, that way, yes, this is not a model that will scale in every environment. Of course, there are clusters that are not, fiber transit doesn't happen. But if you look at the digital agenda for almost every country, building national fiber infrastructure is part of that agenda. So as you expand that build out to those communities, every transit community, which could be 1,000 residents, you could drop off connectivity for those clusters. Now, why the economies could work better is because the infracos themselves have the customers from the MNOs and the big telcos actually essentially de-risk the investment for them. So these small cell operators can take off these huge 60% cost without it, hitting their balance sheet and actually messing up their records. And that's one approach that we're evaluating. And we're already running a test on this with one of the MVNOs licensed on our space as well.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you, Chidi. Bradley, so two things. One, your now renowned direct-to-phone satellite service from Lynk, but also, and I want to ask the question on that one, are you bypassing the MNOs? Are you providing service directly to the end user? And if so, what's the impact of that further down the line? Secondly, I know that in a previous life, you looked at the rural connectivity from the small cell provider perspective. Give us an insight into successes of how rural connectivity has worked, how you are enabling it through your direct-to-phone, and what problem that fixes that the small cell challenge didn't, and if you've got any specific use case success stories or failures, let's hear them.
Fantastic, thanks, Adrian. And Chidi, I must just also comment on what you guys are doing. I think it's absolutely phenomenal that you guys are starting to provide fiber connectivity into rural communities. The economic development and upliftment for those communities is going to be amazing moving forward. So I think it's a great solution. But Adrian, before I get to the questions you've just asked, I'd like to comment on your first statement as well, and asking us to disagree with you about the alignment between regulator and kind of MNO strategy. And I think it's vitally important, and I think the fact, as I said yesterday, broadband is now being considered a basic human right. If that is the case, why or how can there possibly be misalignment between government and the private sector in terms of providing those services to our communities? As I said yesterday, I've been in this industry for 15 years. I know many of you have been in the industry a lot longer than I have. The conversation hasn't changed. We're still talking about bridging the digital divide 15 years later. In Africa, we've got 55% unique subscriber penetration according to the GSMA. That means 45% of our populations don't have connectivity at home. How, in 2024, do we have 45% of a continent of 1.2 billion people that aren't connected? I find it absolutely horrendous that that is still the case. And I think we as industry need to kind of do our best to collaborate with governments as much as we can to close that divide. So that's just kind of an aside in terms of comment on your first piece. Then coming back to Lynk and the MNO relationship, and we're a B2B company. Unfortunately, we can't offer the services direct to consumer. We used licensed spectrum to deliver services from the handset to the satellites. That licensed spectrum is owned predominantly by MNOs. So we have an absolutely collaborative and partnership approach in terms of working with the MNOs. Our commercial model is such that it is an OpEx-based model only. There's no CapEx. So it's very easy and very predictable for the MNO to know how much profit they're going to make, what profit they're going to make, and how the service is going to roll out moving forward. So it's a very easy conversation to have with the MNO in terms of rolling out the service. As I said, it's a one-size-fits-all solution. We can come into any country on the continent and provide service in the 900, 800, 700, and part of the 600 band spectrums. We've tested in 900, 800, and 700. I haven't found an operator that has 600 band spectrum in Africa to be able to test with. So it really is an amazing solution. I'm super excited about the potential that this network has moving forward. It's a journey for us. It's a massive investment. We currently have 5 satellites in orbit. We've been doing this for 8 years. We've patented the Doppler and timing compensation algorithms that we created to overcome the fact that the satellite is moving at 500 kilometers an hour and that it's 500 kilometers away. The handset is looking for a stationary tower. Chidi, you guys, the engineers, will be able to give me the exact numbers, but I think it's 15 kilometers for 2G, 30 or 25 kilometers for LTE, and 5G, I think it's slightly further. Or something along those lines. I'm not an engineer, so apologies if I get the numbers wrong. But our satellite's at 500 kilometers, so we've had to overcome those challenges to be able to make it work. And then, Adrian, as you mentioned in a previous life, I worked in the RAN space. I sold Open RAN hardware and proprietary rural hardware for Vanu and New RAN Wireless out of the US and Canada. And in that time, I was part of the discussion and driving New RAN specifically's network as a service business model. So I have some experience in terms of having that network as a service discussion with the MNOs. Firstly, from a rollout perspective, rolling out equipment, as Chidi said, in the rural communities is hugely expensive. The CapEx involved to deliver towers, power, and active equipment to those sites becomes very costly very quickly. Hence, the MNOs are looking at outsourcing that into kind of network as a service type business models, where they effectively take the CapEx and put it into an OpEx expense. And then they don't have to invest the CapEx. What they have done, though, is they've passed that CapEx spend onto small companies that generally can't afford that CapEx themselves. So one of the biggest challenges we're having in that network as a service business model is access to capital. And the investment community and the kind of World Bank and those kind of guys are looking at these investments. European Investment Bank is one. They've done some investments into, or loans into this space. The greatest success in this environment at the moment in that network as a service business model is Africa Mobile Networks. To be clear, they were a customer of mine when I was at New RAN. So we did have some access to their and what they were doing. Mike Darcy, the CEO, is an absolute pioneer in the space. He was the first one to deploy a network as a service type model on a radioactive network. And they've grown from strength to strength. They now have the capital through various VC and private equity investments to be able to roll out these networks. I think he now has in the region of 4,000 active sites live. They've just put their first site live in Nigeria using Starlink from SpaceX's backhaul. So they are innovating and they are pushing the boundaries in terms of what can be done. So that is probably the biggest success story in the space. In terms of failures, unfortunately, there are many. There are many companies that have tried to get into this business model, and it's the CapEx that's killed them. It's not the OpEx, it's the CapEx investment of being able to build sites at scale to be able to create enough revenue and margin to cover your costs.
Thanks, Bradley. Jawad, maybe you could give us an insight into the private network side as well as just the rural side, because we haven't really touched much on the private networks. What are they about? Why do we have those? Who's responsible for building those? How do they work with the MNOs to connect to the rest of the world. Any insights around that area? Or by all means, talk about rural as well.
Okay, so thank you. Let me start with rural because that's my passion, and I've had the privilege of serving as a CTO in one of the rural companies back in my previous lives, and the company was called Rural Netco in Tanzania, which was a very visionary initiative by the regulator, and at that point, the company I worked for acquired a frequency. So let me start with a few things from a practical perspective. A few challenges that you will face for rural network. Number one is frequencies. Yes, and this is where I think I want to touch a little bit, that it should be aligned between the private organizations as well as the government, the regulator, where it is in the regulator's interest to bring connectivity for multiple reasons. Bridging the digital divide, banking the unbanked, the socio-economic impact on connecting these rural communities is so huge and it grows that, and the demand is there. So if one of the other challenges that you face is the business. Yes, Bradley touched here on the capex required to roll out such networks. Yes, and I tell you out of experience, yes, you roll out the network, the demand is there, and it will grow. So the private sector, yeah. So I would like to share one of the sites that we were doing with Rural Netco was so remote that if it was a rainy season, every morning I actually prayed that this site should not go down, because it took my engineers 6 days wading through mud. It was so rural that it took them 6 days wading through mud, waiting for the mud to clear out a little bit and the waters to shallow down so that they can pass their 4x4s through it. And that was my busiest site. That was the site carrying the highest amount of traffic. So the demand is there. The moment you bring in this connectivity into rural communities, the demand is there and it will grow. And I'm talking of a decade ago when I had this privilege. So it's probably getting higher and higher with the social media, with the businesses running off social media. So that is on rural networks. On private networks, so just to start by defining them, private networks, why are they required? They're required by a very specialized group of people, yes, or a very specific use case. And I could mention a few. For example, mines, where, for example, in Mozambique, and I don't know if this is a public reference, but I'll mention it nevertheless. There is a mining company which needed connectivity deep inside the mines, a place where often you see wireless Wi-Fi networks, etc., fail to work because of the depth, the environment, and the latencies, because you need quick real-time responses to the machines. You're looking at Internet of Things playing a role here, where you have for example, the mining, the crusher, the machine that actually goes into the hole. That it's very hazardous to put a human to operate it at those environments. And then what is the next best solution is to have it controlled remotely. And there you're talking of latencies, real time, etc. And that is where private networks come in. The second use case is where you have a very remote area. For example, there is an LNG platform, a liquid gas platform off the coast of, I think, Mozambique, or off the coast of Madagascar, depends which way you look at it. And they had this requirement, and a private LTE network created on their vessel for communication internally, because it was too far out for any communications that could, for any operator to link them from either side of land. So that is another use case on private networks. Now, I was trying to think that, and keep me on timing, yes, because otherwise I'll keep talking. Good. So the other thing I was trying to think was to link these two, and that is where I have a challenge to link rural communities with private networks. For me, the current use cases, and maybe somebody will come with a use case where we can create private networks, the private wireless networks or private LTE or 5G in a remote area and make a business case out of it. Yes, but currently what I have seen is it's mainly for very limited focus areas.
Okay. No, that's very good. Thank you. Really good insights. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to see if anybody from the audience wants to ask anything before we continue our discussions. We have a taker now, please.
Thank you. I think I'll start. Bradley, I think I've heard you mention broadband is considered a human right. Yesterday, I wanted to look it up. Who said that, or who decided? Was it at the World Economic Forum at Davos, or was it at The Hague? I will look it up, but I will appreciate your answer. But however, is there a kind of a hierarchy of human rights, right? Are we putting broadband at the top, or is it going to be at the bottom? I'll be interested to see where we land. However, the other question I have is in terms of devices compatibility with network types, right? That's a challenge for the past few years. I am wondering if there could be a miniature adapter that will work and with any network and adapts that communication to any device. Maybe that's a device idea.
So I'll start with the first question, the last question first. And in terms of devices, we are backwardly compatible on all devices. So whether it's an IoT device from the late 90s, or sorry, when did IoT come out? Probably not that early. I'm not an engineer, apologies. So all IoT devices, we did one of our first flyover tests we did in the US was on the eastern seaboard, running from kind of north of New York, running south down the east coast towards Carolina. And we connected to legacy IoT devices in New York City. We connected to combine harvesters in the rural areas outside. We connected to tractor. So we connected all sorts of devices that were 3GP compliant, connected using the spectrum, and had specifically in that incredibly dense telecoms covered area, we connected to nearly 1,000 devices in one passover that at the time were not connected to any network. Otherwise, if they were connected to a network, they wouldn't be searching. So that's the only way we can connect to devices, if it's actually looking for a connection. So there's that. Then in terms of the basic human rights, so it was the United Nations has called universal access to the internet by 2030. So that's the target. And the Wikipedia entry, which I'll just read, is the right to internet access, known as the right to broadband or freedom to connect, is the view that all people must be able to access the internet in order to exercise and enjoy their rights to freedom of expression and opinion and other fundamental human rights. So that's where it comes from. In terms of exactly when and where, whether it was a WEF summit or a UN summit, I have absolutely no idea. Okay,
Thanks, Bradley. Any other questions before we? Dr. Bashir, I was expecting a question from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. The last speaker actually mentioned something about connecting the unconnected, that is to say, giving services where services doesn't exist. I was kind of confused about the kind of service, because they said B2B, business to business. If it's B2B, certainly in rural communities, is not such a huge case in point. I mean, I thought and it's important for the audience to know that your services can be used where services don't exist. It's important that you can communicate that message, that here I have tools to give you communication where you don't have any bar on your telephone. I can provide that link. but it doesn't, it is only B2B. And if it's B2B, surely it should have some connectivity with urban areas, because there will be business between rural and urban areas. I want you to comment that maybe it's not, maybe you haven't, if you like, send the whole message. But, and if it's B2B, is that something that is really, in huge demand in rural communities? I think the rural communities are really looking for just ability to connect. I would like your comment on that now. The second point I want to raise is in respect of the vision of telecom companies. I think all telecom companies, yes, I understand, this is Adrian's comment earlier on. All telecom companies are, the first vision really to link consumers, or how you link those you offer service to. Yes, shareholders might have their own drive, because, and that's where the rural area, urban rural areas come into being, and that's why the collaboration between government and the private sector has to happen, because the margins are not sufficient to cover the cost. If the margins are not sufficient to cover the cost, yes, there is scope for that kind of collaboration. But primarily, we are all here sitting as passionate ICT people. We have the passion to make sure that we use ICT to deliver services to people from wherever they are around the planet. That's what I want to comment on.
Thank you, Dr. Bashir. Very good, good insights. And I want to briefly answer the question regarding the B2B. And Bradley, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I'm keeping it so that it's abbreviated. B2B meaning Lynk is one business, the mobile operator is the other business, and the mobile operator will then provide the service to the end user. So it does service the consumer. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Did I hear a yes? I've got a question. Over here with the microphone, please.
Hello, greetings everyone. Thank you for the panelists for their insightful discussion. My question is for Bradley. With the advancement of low Earth orbit constellation like Starlink, how do you see satellite network evolving in the next 4 or 5 to 10 years? And will it play a role in the 5G network? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great question. I'm a huge sci-fi fan. I hope that these satellite constellations are not going to become Skynet from Terminator. Sorry, it's joking aside. So it's a phenomenal opportunity in terms of the development of the networks in the 10 to 15 years. I see it that we'll be providing 5G services directly from the satellite to mobile devices on the ground. In our satellites at the moment, we currently have a 2G, 4G, and 5G stack built into the network in a box in the satellite itself. We require no ground infrastructure at all. We come into the operator's core network via the IPX or the roaming interface. So there's no ground infrastructure required at all. We use Ka-band as the backhaul from the satellite carrying the traffic back into the network. So in terms of that development, what I didn't mention earlier is the fact that we have 5 satellites in orbit currently. We need 500 satellites to become a 24/7, 365 service, so that we'll have total global coverage all the time. But the full constellation is registered with the ITU at 5,552 satellites. So we have a hell of a journey ahead of us in terms of launching satellites into orbit. It's going to take us a while. But we're incredibly excited because once we get to the 500 satellite points, there is not going to be a single square kilometer on the planet where you won't be able to get connectivity. Whether that's on the top of Everest, on the points of the North Pole or the South Pole, we will be able to provide you coverage literally anywhere on the planet.
Thanks, Bradley. We nearly at the end. So, Jean, I'm going to invite you. There's something you want to say, so I'm inviting you to say that. But there's one thing I want you to say as well. I want you to give us one example, one thing, the biggest impact, the one thing that would have the biggest impact in improving rural connectivity or the development of the private networks.
Well, now in rural connectivity, when you go to villages where they have very small housing, to have 5G is not going to be, it's not going to work. It's gonna, the best thing is to have the free Wi-Fi because 5G is very expensive to, and now they're going to 6G is going to be more expensive, I believe. So and now we have a very good technology when it comes to 5 gig or free Wi-Fi. They're giving a very big data. Like you have sectors they give up to 10 gig, they claim, and even on the sector 255 users. I think this is the best thing. But I'd like to tell about about the VSAT future. VSAT future is not going to go away. VSAT future is going to stay. VSAT future, there are a lot of innovation, and the market for the low orbit satellites is going to be very competitive, and not everybody's going to survive. This for sure. But and now there are also some kind of disruptive technology where you have small satellites. A country can have their own satellites. They can lease a satellite for 10 years, and they can have what we call private network for schooling, for telemedicine, for hospitals, for military, for oil and gas, all of them in one satellite. So the country can be independent and have their own what we call content control, because internet is creating in some countries what we call cultural collision.
John,
So the VSAT is not going to go away. This is why we are.
Dr. Rao's looking very intimidating there, so I'm going to rush along on the panel, but thank you for that very good insight. Chidi, what's the one thing that would have the biggest impact in improving rural connectivity or private network?
Okay, I think the discussions around rural connectivity are less of telecommunications and more of economic and social inclusion. I mean, technology exists, it can be done, but it's more of the economic side and the viability of the opportunities that matter most. So, so if you look, I keep going back to the national digital agendas. If we can build up digital agendas that are much more inclusive, especially when it comes to infrastructure build out. When you have, I know Jean referred to the issue of infracos in some clusters. If you can have focused entities on the ecosystem who are focused on building out just the infrastructure, and then they can actually de-risk the investment required on the other layers of applications and services. So I think focusing on build out of infrastructure is a core thing that needs to be done. And once that's done, you can easily tee off to connect these rural communities, because the biggest issue of connecting the rural side is the connectivity. Like we say, the connectivity side of rural connectivity is where the problem is.
Fantastic, thank you, Chidi. Bradley, one big thing that is not direct-to-phone satellite that can improve rural connectivity or private
100%. I'll try and keep it short because I know I can talk a lot. But firstly, thank you, Extensia, for the wonderful event again, as always. I look forward to seeing everyone at the next one. And in terms of the big thing, non-direct-to-device satellite requirements, if you guys have got money to invest, we're going public in September. We'd love your support and investment. If any corporates have got billions of dollars they want to invest in satellites, that'll help us roll out more satellites and get it done faster.
Thanks, Bradley. Okay, so Jawad, save the best till last.
Thank you. So, being an account manager, I think I'm expected to do a sales pitch at some point, but I'll keep it short. But before I go on to the solutions and what we spoke about, the one thing that I think rural connectivity is the capex, and I want to answer that. But the doctor from the audience here raised a very good question on B2B and B2C. So the business cases that we've worked on rural connectivity has always been, so if you look at the business case, if you go in alone as the service provider, that is bound, okay, let me not say fail because there might be a very good economist who will challenge me on it. But the better business case, if I can put it that way, is that you go in as a B2B where the operators are your customers, and you are looking at things like MOCN or MORAN sharings, depending on the frequencies, yes? And a shared network where all the operators existing in a company. So for example, in Ethiopia, both Safaricom and Ethiotel will become your customers. Then you have revenues for them, and that is where the business case will fly. And that is where the B2B kind of flavor comes into rural connectivity. Now, the biggest challenge in rural connectivity is cost. And I must say, in Nokia, we have recently come up with a very good solution that is called Rural Connect. And it considers a lot of aspects, yes? The tower size, the tower height, green energies where the entire site is solar powered, and then the connectivity, like my esteemed colleague here, Chidi, if I get your name right, mentioned, the connectivity. So there is a technological advance that is called UE relay, where you use one 4G site without requiring any frequency or fiber connectivity to power or to connect the other. So to power in terms of transmission and not electric, but to connect the other side. And this is a proven technology rolled out quite recently. So you don't, I'm not saying that your technology, your fiber rollout is not required, but this can reach bigger leaps. LTE backhauling is another name for it, yes, correct. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So, Jawad, Jean, Chidi, Bradley, thank you all. And of course, nobody's the best, but we're all excellent, and I thank you very much for your contributions, very valuable. I hope you're all going to now rush out and build rural networks and private networks, and Africa will be connected after this event. So thank you very much to everybody for listening, and thank you to the panel for taking part. Thank you.